Hello, everyone. Tonight we are diving into a slumber party of the strange, a whispered journey into a time when dinner plates held more surprises than a magician's hat at a particularly surreal birthday party. Tonight, you're nestled in, perhaps a soft blanket draped over your shoulders, as we explore the odd recipes from forgotten Victorian-era cookbooks. Imagine the flicker of a gas lamp, the faint clatter of horse-drawn carriages outside, and the aroma of something utterly inexplicable wafting from the kitchen. We're talking about an era where comfort food might involve things that would make your modern-day digestive system stage an immediate, non-negotiable protest. You probably won't survive this. At least not with your sense of culinary normality intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. And hey, where are you listening from tonight? Let me know your city and local time down in the comments. I love seeing our sleepy little community grow across the globe. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get going tonight. You find yourself in the soft glow of a Victorian kitchen, not the pristine, granite-topped expanse you might be used to, but a more functional, perhaps a little more chaotic space, scented with coal smoke and a bewildering array of simmering things. Here, behind closed doors and heavily starched aprons, the culinary mind of the 19th century was busy, constantly innovating, always striving for new tastes and textures, often with ingredients that make us, with our 21st century sensibilities, do a very slow blink and wonder if they were, well, okay. The Victorians, you see, were a people of immense curiosity, propelled by an age of burgeoning science and expanding empire, and their food reflected this wild exploration. From your sleepy vantage point, imagine a larder overflowing not just with jams and pickles, but with jars holding things that shimmered suspiciously, or powders promising instant cures for all known ailments, even a bad mood. It's an intoxicating mix, really. A curious blend of old-world practicalities and a new, almost scientific approach to the art of dining. We're not talking about your grandma's hearty Sunday roast here, folks. Though, to be fair, your grandma might have picked up some peculiar habits if she lived through an age when recipes often started with the charming instruction, procure a medium-sized tortoise, and only went uphill from there. The pantry shelves of the Victorian era weren't merely stocked, they were brimming with ambition. Remember that old cliché, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach? Well, in Victorian England, the way to social status, good health, and perhaps even marital bliss was apparently paved with unexpected offal and, shall we say, creatively repurposed animal parts. An authoritative historical fact for you. During the Victorian era, as the British Empire expanded, exotic ingredients like tapioca, arrowroot, and various tropical fruits became more accessible, though often still very expensive, influencing the creation of many new and strange dishes that previously would have been impossible. So it wasn't just about making do. It was also about showing off. Oh, look, dearest, we're serving tinned kangaroo tail tonight, straight from the Antipodes. How terribly modern of us. Can you picture the strange smiles around that dinner table? The average Victorian kitchen had a wider array of staples than you might imagine, but the application was often wildly different. Sugar for example, was increasingly abundant thanks to colonial trade and the abolition of slavery's negative impact on sugar production. This led to a boom in desserts and confectionery, often leading to concoctions so sweet they would make your teeth hurt just looking at them, which is a surprisingly appropriate way to consider how quickly their dentists became very busy. An odd, off-topic fact that relates to this sugary abundance. In 19th century Britain, tea consumption skyrocketed, transforming into a national ritual. And where there's tea, there's usually something sweet to go with it, adding another layer to the era's burgeoning interest in complex multi-course meals. Imagine all that sugar fueling even stranger concoctions. Many of these forgotten recipes hail from a time when frugality was still paramount for most households. Yet alongside this practical approach was an aspirational drive for elaborate presentation and novel flavors. Cookbooks weren't just practical guides. They were also aspirational manifestos, pushing boundaries and suggesting ingredients that might only have been within reach of the burgeoning middle and upper classes. But they also offered surprisingly intricate ways to stretch a shilling, like making mock turtle soup, not from a turtle, but from, well, we'll get to that another time. And it's certainly more palatable than real turtle, if you ask me. Sleepyheads, consider this. Many recipes from this period were not just about sustenance. They were about theater. They were about creating an impression, often one that verged on the surreal. The kitchen, then, was less a place of humble preparation and more a scientific laboratory and an artistic workshop combined. This exploration of the bizarre was also fueled by a burgeoning scientific understanding, or at least a perceived understanding, of nutrition and health. Foods were often prescribed with specific medicinal properties, which sounds reasonable until you find out that, say, consuming boiled pigeon with a dash of gin was considered a legitimate cure for, well, probably indigestion caused by the boiled pigeon and gin. Historians still debate whether the Victorians genuinely enjoyed some of their more notorious dishes, or if it was more a matter of polite society enduring the latest fashionable culinary absurdity. Did they truly enjoy a potted veal surprise that contained bits of unidentifiable animal organs, or were they just very good at feigning polite interest? The gentle rhythmic sound of this voice, you drifting deeper, lets the strangeness seep in. Imagine a silent, dusty kitchen where cookbooks with faded leather covers lay open, revealing intricate scripts for concocting dishes like eel cake or calf's head a la gentry. These weren't culinary dares. They were just dinner. As you slip further into comfort, consider the ingredients often listed in these books. Things that modern supermarkets simply don't stock, or at least don't present in such a challenging manner. We're talking about a significant dive into a world where a chicken was less a neat package of breast and thigh, and more an entire creature, every part of which was fair game for the pot, from comb to claw. It's a reminder that what we consider food is remarkably culturally and historically specific, a fluid concept that changes with the times. Tonight, we embrace that fluidity, letting the curious, sometimes alarming ingredients of the Victorian pantry gently lead us deeper into dreamland. As your eyelids grow a little heavier, drifting in this spectral Victorian kitchen, your gaze might settle on a gleaming, multifaceted creation trembling delicately on a side table. Forget your humble modern-day Jell-O cube. The Victorians took gelatin, or gelatine, as they pronounced it, with a certain dignified wobble, and transformed it into an art form, a scientific marvel, and, let's be honest, often a culinary curiosity that looks rather alarming to our eyes. We're talking about an era utterly obsessed with things that shimmered and quivered, not just on the dessert cart, but right alongside your roasted pheasant. Remember that sense of theatricality we just touched upon? Well, this is where the curtain truly goes up, and the jiggling, translucent stage props come into play. Imagine a grand Victorian dinner party. The aroma of simmering spices might mix with something elastic. Every course, from appetizer to dessert, was an opportunity to showcase not just expensive ingredients, but also incredible skill. And nothing said skill quite like perfectly molded gelatin. This wasn't simply a matter of pouring hot liquid into a ramekin. No. Creating these towering, often architectural structures, some even featuring miniature landscapes or detailed designs suspended within them, required painstaking patience and absolute dedication to clarification to get that perfectly transparent sheen, and often a hefty supply of calf's feet, knuckles, or, if you were feeling particularly fancy, isinglass from sturgeon bladders. If you're ever feeling adventurous, try explaining to your local butcher why you need enough cowhock bones to build a small fort. They'll surely have some follow-up questions. Now, before you picture a parade of wobbly strawberry jellies, let's widen the scope. The Victorian aspic was where things truly got intriguing. These were savory jellies, often shimmering amber, emerald, or deep garnet, used to encase anything from cold cuts and hard-boiled eggs to whole roasted birds or elaborate seafood arrangements. You might slice into a glittering mold and find a perfect mosaic of sliced carrots, peas, and maybe a tiny fish head staring back at you. It sounds like something designed for a particularly elegant horror movie set, doesn't it? An authoritative historical fact. The increasing availability and affordability of industrially produced sheet gelatin, first patented by Peter Cooper in the US in 1845, then refined throughout the century in Europe, made elaborate jelly molds and aspics accessible to the burgeoning middle classes, transforming them from high-status dishes to everyday curiosities. Suddenly, everyone could try their hand at making these quivering masterpieces, leading to an explosion of bizarre and creative culinary endeavors. The aesthetic was everything. A truly successful aspic had to be perfectly clear, like a polished gemstone, with the ingredients suspended artfully within its depths. Think of it as an edible museum display. Sometimes you'd find a deboned bird, a pigeon or a lark, perfectly reconstituted and then suspended in a clear, savory jelly, looking utterly perplexed to be enshrined in such a way. It's hard to imagine anyone truly relishing the thought of slicing into a pigeon encased in, essentially, firm, savory jello. But then again, different strokes for different folks, I suppose. And it did provide a great way to use up leftovers. This wasn't just a passing fancy. It was a defining characteristic of Victorian culinary ambition. The ability to make perfectly clear jellies was a sign of a truly competent cook. And it often took an entire day, or even two, to clarify the gelatin broth, skim it endlessly, and then carefully layer the components into their molds, chilling each layer precisely. It's enough to make you long for the simpler times of add water, microwave, done. Oh, to have been a fly on the wall, or perhaps more aptly, a single, perfectly suspended pea within one of those creations. The molds themselves were works of art, intricate copper or tin forms, shaped like castles, crowns, animals, or elaborate geometric patterns. Displaying these molds was a status symbol in itself, often hung gleaming in the kitchen or dining room. The presentation mattered more than the actual taste. At least it often seems to us. An odd, off-topic fact related to Victorian aesthetic obsessions. Parallel to the rise of elaborate jelly molds was the popularity of taxidermy. Wealthy Victorians loved displaying meticulously preserved animals, often posed in human-like scenarios, blurring the lines between art, nature, and the delightfully uncanny, much like their molded meat. Perhaps it's just the 19th century mind enjoying things being oddly frozen in time. There's a silent, almost ethereal elegance to these wobbling creations, a ghostly presence of culinary theater that lingers in the Victorian kitchen. Historians still debate whether these gelatin-heavy dishes were primarily enjoyed for their taste, or if their popularity was more about display, a testament to the cook's skill and the household's wealth, particularly considering some of the frankly baffling ingredient combinations suspended within them. Were they truly delicious, or just terribly impressive? Was the joy in eating it, or in watching it shimmy ever so slightly as it was brought to the table? Either way, you can almost hear the hushed gasps of appreciation around the dining table. Imagine asking a polite Victorian lady if she wanted more fish head mosaic suspended in meat jelly for dessert. Her gentle, yet firm refusal might speak volumes. The concept of texture was vastly different, with a high premium placed on smooth, trembling, or conversely crispy and crunchy elements, often side by side. These gelatinous constructions, for all their strangeness, provided a novel mouthfeel that was evidently highly sought after. They weren't just food, they were experience. As you sink deeper into your bed, envision these delicate, transparent towers, almost architectural in their ambition. The subtle light in our imagined kitchen dances off their surfaces, creating a shimmering kaleidoscope of forgotten flavors and forgotten customs. It was an age where dinner was not just about satiating hunger, but about delighting the eye, astonishing the guests, and sometimes, perhaps, quietly testing the boundaries of human polite consumption. These elaborate dishes speak of a desire for control over nature, to impose order on organic chaos, presenting edible forms that defied expectations. And for tonight, that's just another piece of the wonderfully bizarre Victorian culinary landscape for your mind to softly process as you drift off to sleep. As that gentle shimmer of molded aspic fades into the cozy dimness of your mind, a different kind of culinary endeavor comes into focus within our soft Victorian kitchen. Food not just for pleasure, but for profound, if misguided, healing. This is where the kitchen began to double as an apothecary, where bubbling pots held not just a delicious supper, but a prescriptive, often desperate, remedy for what ailed the populace. The Victorians were utterly fascinated by health, disease, and the perceived restorative powers of the natural world, particularly what they could put into a stew pot. So, as you snuggle deeper, imagine the cloying aroma of heavily boiled meat, believed to cure anything from a bad disposition to a chronic cough. Picture, if you will, a frail-looking lady, perhaps suffering from melancholy, which was a common umbrella term for a myriad of psychological and emotional ailments. What would the esteemed Dr. What's-His-Name prescribe? Likely not a chat with a therapist. More often, it involved a regime of highly caloric, often meat-heavy concoctions designed to build her up and restore her nervous energies. We're talking about everything from concentrated beef tea, a strong, gelatinous essence of boiled beef, meant to be consumed slowly from a spoon like a precious elixir, to rich gravies and pureed meats. It's hard to imagine something less appetizing than pureed meats when you're feeling a bit low, isn't it? One might politely wonder if these cures ever genuinely helped, or if the sheer weight of protein and fat simply forced the patient into a state of contented digestion. One particularly notable malady of the era was consumption, what we now know as tuberculosis. This was a widespread, terrifying disease, and without antibiotics, treatments were largely speculative. Many popular cures involved heavy nourishment. Patients were often encouraged to consume vast quantities of milk, raw eggs, and fatty meats like rich broth, calf's foot jelly. Remember our gelatin obsession from the last section? Or even raw beef. Yes, you heard that right. Raw beef. Sliced thinly, perhaps pounded, sometimes steeped in brandy. The idea was to strengthen the body against the insidious wasting away caused by the illness. One can only imagine the sheer iron fortitude of the digestive system required to handle such a regimen when already ill. Your sleepy stomach probably just gave a tiny shiver, imagining an authoritative historical fact that showcases this dietary medical philosophy. In the latter half of the 19th century, particularly influenced by figures like Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell in America, a highly influential rest cure for conditions like neurasthenia, nervous exhaustion, was developed. This treatment involved absolute bed rest, isolation, massage, and most importantly, forced feeding of large quantities of rich, easily digestible, high-calorie foods, often focusing heavily on milk, butter, and raw or rare beef and meat extracts, sometimes amounting to truly astronomical calorie counts to rebuild the body and mind. The notion that food is medicine was a foundational pillar of health practices, sometimes leading to genuinely bizarre or frankly unappetizing culinary concoctions designed specifically for invalids. Beyond explicit medical conditions, these dietary theories permeated everyday life. People consumed certain foods because they were believed to have warming or cooling properties, to cleanse the blood, or to fortify the spirit. Tired from a long day? Have some bone marrow on toast. Feeling a bit anxious? A warm posset made with ale and spices might be just the ticket. Of course, a stiff drink might simply make you less anxious about anything, including what you just ate. An odd, off-topic fact related to Victorian health aspirations. At the same time that these meat-heavy medical diets were prescribed, a growing vocal temperance movement was also gaining significant traction, pushing for abstinence from alcohol. This created interesting social paradoxes, as alcohol was often included in medicinal tonics, and certain dishes were explicitly consumed to soothe ailments, even if they had a good dose of spirits within them. Imagine trying to explain to your temperance crusading aunt why your cough medicine tastes suspiciously like whiskey. It must have made for some rather spirited, pun-intended dinner table conversations. This unwavering belief in food's inherent curative powers also manifested in dishes designed for children, or pudding for little invalids, as some cookbooks term them. These often consisted of pureed chicken, bland broths, and boiled grains, intended to be gentle on delicate stomachs. Sometimes they even had a hint of some rather unappetizing additions, such as a drop or two of laudanum, an opium tincture, to ensure the little one rested well. Talk about a full-service sleepy time snack. Perhaps we should be grateful for modern medicine and its, generally, non-narcotic child-friendly cough syrups. Historians still debate the primary reasons for the pervasive belief in food as a panacea. Was it scientific curiosity in a nascent medical field, desperation in the face of widespread illness and lack of pharmaceutical solutions, or a lingering faith in ancient folk remedies combined with new culinary access? It was likely a complex blend of all these factors. The lines between scientific theory, empirical observation, and deeply ingrained tradition were exceptionally blurry. There wasn't quite the rigor we associate with medical trials today. If something seemed to make a person feel better, it was worth noting, even if that feeling was primarily due to the comforting warmth of a heavy blanket after consuming something intensely rich. So, as you slowly, steadily drift off into your own sweet dreams, envision the soft glow of a sick-room lamp, the rhythmic sound of a servant spooning thick beef tea into a bowl, or the clink of porcelain as another fortifying concoction is presented. The hope, the desperation, the sincere belief that the simple act of eating the right food could turn the tide against illness was a powerful force in Victorian society. And while many of their theories were later debunked, this period left us with a fascinating, sometimes unnerving, testament to human ingenuity and hope in the face of widespread ailments, showing that sometimes the cure truly was stranger than the disease itself. You probably don't need any beef tea tonight, just pure, uninterrupted sleep. From the soothing warmth of the sick room and its strange, restorative broths, we drift now towards the main course, specifically the rather inventive ways the Victorians tackled their greens and other earthy delights. You might think of vegetables as honest, straightforward members of the food pyramid, quietly doing their fibrous duty. But in the Victorian era, vegetables were not content with their humble station. Oh no, they frequently masqueraded as something else entirely, often something meaty, or frankly, just deeply confusing. So, settle in, close your eyes, and imagine a world where a turnip was not just a turnip, but an imposter awaiting your unsuspecting palate. The Victorians were masters of transformation. With meat often being an expensive commodity for many households, the cunning cook found ways to make cheaper, more abundant vegetables pretend to be their carnivorous counterparts. This wasn't necessarily vegetarianism as we understand it today. It was more about culinary trickery, about giving humble ingredients a deceptive upgrade. Imagine the expectation at the dinner table. A grand, dome-shaped dish is unveiled with a flourish, steaming gently. And then you discover it's not a luscious roast or a game pie, but, well, it's a parsnip that is committed to an elaborate identity theft. It's a culinary bait and switch that would make even the most seasoned chef scratch their head. One classic example was the various mock dishes. Beyond the well-known mock turtle soup, often made with calf's head or brains. There were also mock venison from cauliflower or beetroot, mock crab from parsnips, and even mock chicken pies, often using humble vegetables extensively spiced and prepared to mimic the texture and richness of meat. The effort expended in this charade was truly astounding. They'd chop, mash, spice, and brown, sometimes even mold the vegetables into shapes resembling the very meat they were pretending to be. Can you imagine the poor cabbage thinking it was finally going to shine in its natural glory, only to find itself being asked to impersonate a small pheasant? The injustice. This desire to transform ingredients wasn't solely about economy. It was also about curiosity and pushing culinary boundaries. An authoritative historical fact here. As exotic spices became more widely available and affordable due to imperial trade networks, Victorian cooks enthusiastically incorporated them into dishes, particularly vegetable ones, to add complexity and mimic the richer, deeper flavors of meat. So, your bland cauliflower might get a generous dusting of mace, nutmeg, and cayenne pepper, turning it from a simple side dish into something entirely new, if not always entirely welcome. It's a bit like giving your sensible uncle a mohawk. Sometimes the transformation is less stunning and more perplexing. Beyond the mocks, there were vegetable preparations that simply baffle modern sensibilities. Cucumber ketchup wasn't unheard of, often a tangy, vinegary relish for meat. Fried potatoes with gravy might sound normal, but the potatoes were often cold, sliced thick, and then drowned in heavy, savory gravy, meant as a substantive, almost cloying accompaniment. Then there were boiled root vegetables, served absolutely unadorned, or worse, mixed with other boiled things in a watery mess. It was an age where textures were as varied as tastes, and sometimes a certain mushiness was highly prized. One might quietly reflect that modern-day parents battling children to eat their vegetables might have fared even worse back then, with their boiled parsnip and lentil masquerades. An odd, off-topic fact that parallels this transformation. Victorian interior design also heavily embraced disguises and imitation. False marble was made from painted wood. Plaster might mimic grander materials, and furniture was often layered with ornate carvings to obscure the true nature of the simple timber beneath. Perhaps this societal penchant for presenting things as other than they were seeped into their kitchens too. Everything had to make a grander statement than its humble origins. Is this a solid mahogany dresser? No, darling, it's painted pine. Is this lamb? No, dearest, it's turnip. Both required a generous dose of imagination from the consumer. Sometimes, the methods used to prepare these vegetable dishes involved techniques that would drain the enthusiasm from even the most ardent vegan. Boiled cauliflower, drained, and then drenched in a thick, fatty bechamel sauce, a white sauce, as it was often called, was a staple. Sounds a bit boring, doesn't it? Well, imagine the kind of bechamel sauce where half the butter was meant to go on the boiled vegetable, just before it drowned under a wave of the buttery, floury liquid. This wasn't about health food. It was about maximizing calories and achieving a rich, luxurious feel, regardless of what vegetable lay beneath. Historians still debate whether these vegetable disguises were a clever testament to Victorian resourcefulness and creativity, or if they hint at a subtle discomfort with the simplicity of plant-based fare. Were they trying to elevate the vegetable, or were they just desperate to make it palatable for a population accustomed to more robust meat dishes? Perhaps it's a bit of both, a testament to ingenuity born out of economic necessity and culinary ambition. It truly challenges our modern distinction between savory and sweet, or meat and vegetable, blurring those lines in truly magnificent and occasionally unsettling ways. Imagine your own dinner plate transforming before your very eyes, as your carrots attempt a convincing impression of a sausage roll. As your comfortable warmth cradles you, imagine these humble roots and leafy greens stripped of their vibrant natural characters and molded into something altogether different. The soft glow in our spectral kitchen falls on a pyramid of meticulously layered, pureed lentils attempting to pass themselves off as a joint of beef. The kind of deception that relies more on suggestion and hunger than on true mimicry. It's a gentle reminder that food in any era is as much about expectation and perception as it is about taste and sustenance. Tonight, we let the bewildered parsnips and identity-confused cabbages stand as silent sentinels of Victorian culinary quirkiness, ushering you into a deeper, restful slumber. Perhaps dreaming of perfectly normal, unapologetically themselves, undisguised vegetables. As the whimsical image of disguising vegetables fades from your mind, replaced perhaps by the comforting aroma of a regular, unmocked potato, let your thoughts drift deeper into the very practical, often pungent, realities of the Victorian kitchen, without the humming reassurance of a refrigerator or freezer. How on earth did they keep food from going bad? Ah, welcome, my friends, to the wondrous, often precarious world of preservation. Salting, smoking, pickling, potting, and a rudimentary form of canning that could sometimes prove more adventurous than intended. You're settling in for the long haul now, aren't you? Just like that jar of pickled gherkins, preserved since Queen Victoria's own reign. Imagine a larder, cool and dark, lined from floor to ceiling, with shelves laden with jars, crocks, and salted sacks. The air here would have been thick with the sharp tang of vinegar, the heady aroma of spices, and the unmistakable scent of things undergoing a slow, methodical transformation. Every housewife, from the humblest cottage to the grandest estate, possessed a profound knowledge of preservation. It wasn't a hobby, it was survival. A badly sealed jar or an improperly salted ham wasn't just a minor disappointment. It could mean illness, waste, and hunger. The stakes were considerably higher than wondering if your takeout has gone cold on the journey home. Pickling was a cornerstone of this ancient culinary craft. Forget just cucumbers. If it could be pickled, it was pickled. Walnuts, onions, cauliflowers, eggs, red cabbage, beetroot, fish, all found their way into glass jars filled with hot, spiced vinegar. These were not just accompaniments. They were vital sources of flavor and acidity in the diet, especially during winter months, when fresh produce was scarce. Some of these pickles were vibrant, like bright green walnuts stained by their brine, or vivid purple cabbage slices suspended in murky liquid. Others were less visually appealing, perhaps a whole pickled onion floating forlornly like a forgotten idea in a jar. If you leaned in close, you could almost hear a tiny, high-pitched plea for freedom from the acidic embrace. Then there was salting and curing. Meat and fish, stripped of moisture and bathed in pounds of salt, could last for months. sometimes years. This wasn't merely a little salt to taste. It was a process designed to extract every drop of moisture and render the environment uninhabitable for pesky microbes. Imagine trying to rehydrate and desalt a hunk of beef that's been living in a barrel of brine for 6 months. It involved multiple changes of water, lengthy soaking, and a kind of determined culinary archaeology. The texture was often tough, and the flavor undeniably salty, necessitating long, slow cooking or simmering to make it palatable. We moan about dry chicken now, but they would have laughed us out of the pantry. An authoritative historical fact illustrating this critical reliance on preservation. While true canning, sterilizing food in sealed containers by heat, was invented in the early 19th century by Nicola Appert and patented in England by Peter Durand, the technology, particularly the reliability of tin cans, remained inconsistent throughout the Victorian era. Early tin cans were often quite thick, prone to leaking, and sometimes soldered with lead, which posed significant health risks, especially with acidic foods. So, the convenience of tinned goods came with a hefty, if hidden, danger, as many an unfortunate dinner guest or sailor would discover. You weren't just opening a can, you were opening a historical roulette wheel. One of the more unique methods was potting. This involved cooking meat, game, or fish, often very slowly, perhaps until tender, then pounding it into a paste, heavily spicing it, and packing it tightly into small, wide-mouthed crocks. The magic ingredient? A generous layer of melted butter or clarified fat poured over the top, which would solidify and create an airtight seal, preserving the contents beneath. Imagine opening a small ceramic pot to find a dense, flavorful pâté covered by an inch of opaque butter. It was the original food for adventurers, ideal for picnics, travel, or just an emergency snack on a cold winter's night. It sounded appealing, but that seal needed to be perfect, or else. And sometimes, or else, was a really bad flavor. The danger aspect often came from a rudimentary understanding of food microbiology. They knew that food spoiled, but the precise reasons microscopic bacteria were largely unknown for much of the era. Thus, if a pickling brine wasn't strong enough, or if the fat seal on a potted meat wasn't truly airtight, or if the processing time for an early tin was insufficient, hazardous bacteria, including the very deadly Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria responsible for botulism, could thrive, producing toxins that caused severe illness or death. It was often a blind guess, hoping that strong spices and thorough cooking would mask any developing problems or simply prevent them. Many unfortunate stomach upsets and fevers were likely, in fact, mild to severe cases of food poisoning. It's truly amazing their digestive systems weren't in a state of permanent revolt. An odd, off-topic fact related to this era's innovative and often risky solutions. While they grappled with food preservation, Victorians were also pioneering urban sewage systems to combat widespread disease. So on one hand, vast networks were being built to carry waste away from people, while on the other, they were eating potted meats that might have sat in a jar for a few seasons with little oversight beyond a hopeful prayer. There's a certain paradox to tackling one public health crisis while unwittingly inviting another to dinner. And sometimes, the preservation itself became the danger. To make preserved vegetables like pickles or tinned peas a more appealing bright green, some unscrupulous manufacturers added copper sulfate, a toxic chemical. To whiten bread, they might use alum or chalk. To make jam from cheap, poor quality fruit, they might add lead chromate as a dye. Historians still debate the true prevalence of widespread chronic illness or low-level poisoning directly attributable to these deliberate adulterations, as records are often vague, but the evidence of such practices is extensive. It was a chemical experiment at dinner time, and you were the test subject, whether you liked it or not. So, as you tuck yourself in, imagining rows upon rows of jars glimmering faintly in the soft glow, think of the resilience and ingenuity of the Victorians. Each jar of pickles, every slab of salted beef, and every small pot of rendered game represented a triumph over spoilage, a small victory in the ongoing battle against hunger and seasonality. It's a powerful testament to humanity's desire to extend abundance and tame the relentless march of decay, even if, sometimes, the methods were a little bit, or a lot, risky. As you drift off, let the faint scent of spiced vinegar and ancient salt carry you into a very safe, very modern sleep, far from any questionable preserves. As you cozy further into your warmth, gently let go of the pickling brine's tang and the curious case of the disguised vegetables. Now, our quiet journey takes a fascinating, albeit sometimes disquieting, turn toward the genuinely exotic, a foray into the dining rooms, where dinner parties transformed into adventurous expeditions, plates becoming miniature jungles or distant savannas. You see, with the British Empire expanding like an unconstrained vine, and with scientific exploration opening up vast new worlds, the Victorians developed a peculiar taste for what they found. Not just the sights and sounds, mind you, but often the flavors. This is where zoological gastronomy, the consumption of animals less commonly found on European menus, truly came into its own, presenting a tantalizing, if slightly alarming, array of choices. Imagine an impeccably set dining table, heavy with silverware and crystal, candlelight shimmering across polished mahogany. And then the center dish is brought in. Is it a traditional joint of beef? A familiar bird? Perhaps not. You might find yourself staring at a stew of kangaroo tail or a rich dark beaver ragout. For the truly affluent and adventurous, the centerpiece might even be something truly spectacular and morally complex by today's standards, like roasted turtle. Yes, a whole, actual turtle, which was then transformed into elaborate soups or main dishes. These weren't mere eccentricities. They were profound statements of wealth, of adventurous spirit, and of connection to the far-flung reaches of the empire. Oh, darling, did you taste the civet? Fresh off the latest steamer from Borneo. One can almost hear the slightly forced enthusiasm. The acquisition of such ingredients was a testament to logistical prowess and, sometimes, colonial exploitation. Turtle, in particular, was a grand status symbol. Great living sea turtles would be transported, often cruelly, across oceans from their natural habitats to the grand kitchens of London. An authoritative historical fact illustrates this culinary ambition. During the 19th century, turtle soup, specifically made from actual sea turtles, became a definitive dish of British high society, a benchmark of status and an exotic delicacy, leading to dedicated shipping operations just to transport live turtles from the West Indies to English ports for their unfortunate culinary destiny. This extreme demand sometimes saw live turtles kept in grand ponds or specialized turtle tanks on estates until they were needed for a grand feast. A rather unsettling, slow prelude to their ultimate demise. Beyond the more notorious examples, lesser known, equally peculiar ingredients sometimes graced Victorian tables. Dishes of American possum or various wild game birds not native to Britain were considered unique. Bear meat might appear typically smoked or cured in certain regions. The spirit was one of curiosity and a willingness to sample anything the rapidly expanding world could offer, no matter how unusual or difficult to procure. Imagine having to politely ask your host exactly what sort of furry creature your evening meal might be, hoping it wasn't the household cat. That awkward conversation must have taken place on occasion. This exotic trend wasn't purely about animals. New spices, previously unheard of fruits, pineapples remained incredibly rare and expensive, often merely displayed as centerpieces before consumption, and curious grains began to filter into the culinary consciousness. Things like tapioca, used for unusual puddings, or arrowroot, often for thickeners, or as a digestible food for invalids. Recall our last section. These ingredients push the boundaries of taste and texture, creating novel dining experiences that challenge the palates of a society used to more traditional British fare. An odd, off-topic fact related to Victorian global collecting. Concurrently with their culinary expansion, many Victorian gentlemen built vast curiosity cabinets, or Wunderkammern, collections of rare, exotic, or simply strange objects gathered from around the world. Everything from pickled organs to stuffed animals, exotic shells, and cultural artifacts. This deep fascination with the other extended perfectly from intellectual pursuit to what ended up on their plates. The motivation behind serving such delights was multifaceted. For some, it was indeed genuine curiosity and a love of new flavors. For many others, especially the elite, it was a pure display of wealth and cosmopolitan sophistication. To be able to source, prepare, and present such rare ingredients showcased one's connections and ability to conquer the logistical challenges of a world that, though shrinking due to faster transport, was still vast. Yes, this dish arrived yesterday from our contacts in, well, outer Mongolia. They loved the theatricality of it, didn't they? Of course, the consumption of these exotic meats came with its own set of culinary challenges. Cookbooks offered surprisingly detailed instructions on how to handle, dress, and prepare animals that a modern cook might not even recognize. To make an excellent pie of squirrel, take 3 or 4 young squirrels. Might be a genuine recipe you'd find. They grappled with unique flavors, textures, and often the need to make these unfamiliar meats palatable through generous seasoning, slow braising, or incorporating them into rich, savory pies. Historians still debate whether the widespread consumption of these genuinely unusual meats reflected a true, enduring shift in Victorian gastronomic tastes, or if it was primarily a fleeting fashion, a symbolic performance tied to imperial expansion and class status that faded as the novelty wore off. Was it a real appetite for adventure, or simply keeping up with the Joneses, who just had their latest beaver shipment arrive? There's a certain tragicomedy in imagining a chef trying to make sense of a new exotic shipment, peering confusedly into a box and thinking, right, what exactly does one do with an armadillo? As you let your consciousness float, gently cushioned by the whispers of these historical curiosities, imagine the gas lamps in that elegant Victorian dining room, casting long shadows over plates holding shapes and textures utterly foreign. The quiet clinking of cutlery, the hushed murmur of polite conversation, punctuated by the occasional gasp of surprise, or perhaps suppressed delight, as a guest cautiously samples a piece of genuinely other food. It is a world where the boundary between the wild and the domesticated blurred not just in nature, but right there on the supper table. The consumption of such delights tells a silent story of a powerful empire's reach and a society endlessly fascinated by, and often unafraid to eat, anything new the world presented. And with that thought, drift further into a night of serene, truly normal dreams, free from culinary surprises. As the exotic flavors of distant lands gently recede into the corners of your dreams, allowing you to settle even deeper into your peaceful sleep, let's cast a less glamorous, though utterly pervasive shadow over our charming Victorian kitchen. Because while the cookbooks spoke of ingenuity and refinement, the reality on many a dinner plate was far less wholesome. A curious and sometimes genuinely perilous mixture of actual food and, well, not so actual food. Welcome to the era of adulterated aliments, where almost nothing was quite what it seemed, and every meal could, inadvertently, be a bit of a gamble. Imagine reaching for your morning slice of bread, wonderfully white and fluffy, the pinnacle of respectability. Unbeknownst to you, it likely contains alum to enhance its whiteness and structure, or even plaster of Paris to increase its weight. Or perhaps a sip of tea that, far from being just dried leaves, was enhanced with everything from sheep's dung to iron filings, or even copper carbonate for a richer green hue. So that last sip wasn't just flavor, it was a mini geology lesson. It sounds like something out of a rather bleak cartoon, doesn't it? A mischievous food manufacturer with a bucket of sawdust and an evil glint in their eye. This wasn't a rare occurrence. It was endemic. From the grandest manor to the lowliest dwelling, food adulteration was a fact of daily life, affecting nearly every foodstuff. Why? The motivations were simple: to increase profits by cheapening ingredients, to improve the apparent quality, e.g., making bread whiter or sauces brighter, and sometimes merely to stretch scarce resources further. The Industrial Revolution, with its factories and complex supply chains, made it easier to discreetly tamper with products on a mass scale. Your innocent packet of cocoa might have been diluted with brick dust. Your morning coffee often contained chicory, roasted cereals, or dried roots instead of genuine coffee beans. Even your cheerful, bright yellow custard powder could contain lead chromate for color. The average Victorian probably ingested more random bits of inert matter and mild toxins in a week than we do in a lifetime, unless you're really into adventurous street food. Milk was a notorious offender, often watered down to expand supply, then thickened with chalk, plaster of Paris, or calves' brains to restore its consistency and whiteness. Think about that for a second. Your morning tea, innocent and comforting, potentially infused with brains and plaster. Suddenly, your breakfast feels less like a simple meal and more like a macabre performance art piece. This wasn't just a slight quality reduction. it was often a direct public health hazard. Children, being particularly vulnerable to toxins, suffered disproportionately from contaminated milk and sweets. An authoritative historical fact illustrates the extent of this problem. The publication of Dr. Arthur Hill Hassel's pioneering microscopic investigations in The Lancet in the 1850s, revealing widespread and often dangerous food adulteration, shocked the public and significantly pressured the government. His findings directly led to the passing of the first Comprehensive Adulteration of Food Acts in 1860, and later more effective legislation in 1872 and 1875, which aimed to curb these practices by mandating proper labeling and imposing penalties. So, thank Hassel the next time you pour out a genuinely white glass of milk without contemplating a sudden desire for some gypsum. The desire for aesthetically pleasing, cheap food sometimes overrode any common sense. Sweets, for instance, were a dazzling array of colors, often achieved through highly toxic pigments. Green was made with arsenite of copper, Paris green, red with lead chromate, red lead, and bright yellow with highly poisonous cadmium sulfate. Imagine a tray of brightly colored sweets, irresistible to children, looking like an artist's palette of vibrant, slow-acting poisons. It turns your sleepy sigh into a horrified gasp, doesn't it? The very definition of a hidden danger, wrapped in cheerful packaging. This pervasive adulteration raises fascinating questions. An odd, off-topic fact that relates to this theme of hidden dangers. In the fashion world, Victorian women themselves sometimes faced adulterated accessories. For instance, the arsenic-dyed green fabric of popular dresses could cause skin irritation and even systemic poisoning, particularly if the wearer was exposed to heat or moisture, releasing the toxic fumes. From toxic garments to dangerous dinners, seemingly innocuous parts of life often harbored invisible threats. It paints a picture of a society walking a precarious tightrope of unexamined chemicals. It's tempting to think of Victorian consumers as blissfully unaware, innocently sipping their watered-down milk. But historians still debate whether consumers were entirely naive about the pervasive nature of adulteration, or if a certain degree of knowing tolerance for it existed due to tradition, lack of choice, or the sheer cost of pure alternatives. Were they simply desperate to eat and accepted what they got, or was there an undercurrent of cynical resignation? Did they know their pepper had sand in it and just added more to compensate? The cumulative effect of this constant low-level chemical exposure was probably a background hum of ill health and a general lowering of vitality, mistaken for normal ailments. Perhaps that general sickliness that sometimes permeated the literature of the time wasn't just the weather. Perhaps it was a result of chronically ingested lead. And here you are, cozy and safe, probably only concerned about your almond milk curdling in your coffee. A testament to how far we've come in ensuring the basic purity of our food supply. So, as you slowly drift further into the land of slumber, let the eerie quiet of our Victorian kitchen surround you. Imagine a ghostly shadow reaching for a bag of flour, not just for baking, but for filling. The soft murmur of your own breath is much safer than the secret murmurs of leaded dyes and chalky bread. It's a curious thought, isn't it? How the very act of nourishing oneself could become a stealthy daily poison, and how even the simple comfort of a hot meal might carry an unspoken risk. But don't you worry, your food tonight is clean, and your dreams will be free of any unwanted additions. Good night, sweet friend, and may your sustenance always be pure. Leaving behind the unsettling thought of hidden lead and powdered plaster, let's turn our attention now to a corner of the Victorian kitchen that hummed with a different kind of practicality and sometimes a remarkable resilience. While you might consider your culinary comfort zone firmly in the realm of muscle meats, steaks, chops, perhaps a succulent chicken breast, the Victorians cast their net much wider, embracing what we politely refer to as offal, with an enthusiasm that borders on the truly surprising. Settle deeper, allowing your senses to pick up the faint, almost gamey aroma of something slow cooking in a forgotten part of the stove. The economic reality for most Victorian households dictated that nothing, absolutely nothing, from a slaughtered animal went to waste. If it had once breathed, clucked, or oinked, there was a recipe for it, often several. But beyond mere frugality, there was a genuine culinary art dedicated to transforming these lesser cuts, the organs, the extremities, the bits that might make a modern supermarket shopper recoil, into dishes that were often celebrated for their flavor, their texture, and their ingenuity. Imagine a butcher shop of the era, far from the pre-packaged trays of today. Here, every part was meticulously prepared and sold, from trotters to sweetbreads, kidneys to lights, lungs. If you asked for just chicken, they might hand you the entire bird, expecting you to utilize its entire edible anatomy. The very concept of waste was almost unthinkable. Take tripe, for instance. That's the stomach lining of various ruminant animals, often cows or sheep. In Victorian times, tripe and onions was a humble, popular, and deeply nourishing dish. Prepared properly, boiled for hours until gelatinous and tender, then simmered in a creamy sauce, it offered a distinct texture that was prized. To our modern palate, the mere mention might induce a shudder. But imagine a chilly, damp evening and a steaming bowl of something rich and warming. It fills you right up, perhaps makes you forget about how it got there. You probably won't find it in a cozy gastropub today, and perhaps for good reason. But for generations, it was a true staple. A delicate modern sniff might tell you it smells vaguely of a rubber hose dipped in disinfectant, but to a hungry Victorian, it was comfort. Brains, usually calf or lamb, also made frequent appearances. They were often fried in butter, folded into scrambled eggs, or presented in delicate, savory pastries. Their creamy, custard-like texture, combined with a mild, almost buttery flavor, made them surprisingly versatile, though perhaps the mere thought conjures an unfortunate sense of culinary horror. The Victorians weren't shy. Tongue, as in beef tongue, was a commonplace item, often pickled or pressed into a jelly to be sliced cold for sandwiches or salads. You might see a beautifully ornamented cold tongue, artfully placed as the center of a luncheon spread, with very real taste buds still visible on its surface. Imagine trying to explain to your dinner guests that you're eating the speech organ of a former bovine. Your children's science projects might suddenly gain a lot more depth. An authoritative historical fact confirming this trend. While modern consumption of offal in Western diets has significantly declined, Victorian cookbooks reveal that almost every part of an animal was routinely prepared and consumed. Liver and kidneys, once culinary staples, were frequently turned into savory pies, robust stews, like kidney pie, or steak and kidney pudding, or even delicately sautéed, becoming part of varied and hearty meals across all social strata, not just for the very poor. This widespread usage meant a greater diversity of textures and flavors in their everyday diets than we experience today. And let's not forget heart, typically beef or sheep heart, often stuffed and roasted or sliced thinly for stews. This robust muscle required long, slow cooking, but yielded a rich, intensely meaty flavor. You'd find recipes detailing precisely how to fill a heart with a breadcrumb or herb stuffing, making it into a mini roast in its own right. It wasn't about wasting calories on a prime cut, but rather leveraging everything for maximum sustenance. This focus on maximizing resources probably also extended to the number of dinner parties they crammed into a week. More guests, more chance to serve up something new. The culinary challenge, and perhaps delight, lay in rendering these challenging parts palatable. This meant often pairing them with strong flavors like onions, rich gravies, acidic sauces, and robust spices. The preparation was painstaking. Meticulous cleaning, soaking, parboiling, and often hours of slow simmering to achieve tenderness. This was kitchen work that separated the truly dedicated cook from the mere dilettante. Your ASMR mind probably pictures the slow plop of liver into a pot, followed by the satisfying sizzle of onions and garlic. An odd, off-topic fact related to this thoroughness in utilizing animal parts. While humans were eating organs, Victorian inventors were simultaneously exploring the industrial use of animal byproducts. For instance, gelatine for those elaborate aspects was derived from bones and hides, tallow from fat for candles and soap, and animal guts were processed into violin strings or sausage casings. So, while you might be dining on sheep's trotters, the rest of the sheep might have gone into making a cello or lighting your dinner. The sheer interconnectedness of Victorian industries and consumption was remarkable. Historians still debate whether the enduring popularity of offal throughout the Victorian era was solely due to economic necessity, a culinary appreciation of diverse textures and flavors, or a cultural carryover from older practices when all parts of a hunt were revered. Was it simply, this is what we have? Or was there a deeper, genuine delight in a carefully prepared tripe and onion stew? The sheer number of offal recipes suggests a more enthusiastic acceptance than modern sensibilities might allow. They probably looked at our future lack of interest in brain fritters with polite Victorian bemusement. Wasteful, my dear. So, as you finally succumb to sleep, let the faint ghostly whispers of busy Victorian kitchens, where every scrap of every creature found a purpose, drift over you. Imagine the patient simmer of kidneys in a rich gravy, the surprisingly delicate smell of a liver pâté cooling, or the sight of a whole roasted heart gracing a respectable dining table. It is a quiet testament to a bygone era of thoroughness, resilience, and a lack of squeamishness that allowed nothing to go to waste, inviting you into a dream world where the boundaries of what is considered edible are wonderfully, harmlessly blurred. May your sleep be sound, and your plate refreshingly, entirely free of tripe. As the last whisper of tripe and tongue fades from your ears, settling into the vast, comforting quiet of your inner landscape, we pivot, not to grand banquets or exotic culinary expeditions, but to something perhaps even more fundamental to the Victorian spirit: comfort. But what, you might ask, constituted a comfort food in an era of strange gelatin molds and suspect food additives. Lean in closer, my friend, and imagine the quiet crackle of a fireplace on a cold, damp night. Here, deep in the hearth's glow, the Victorians crafted dishes designed to warm you from the inside out, often with ingredients that would send a shudder down your modern spine. Forget your familiar bowl of macaroni and cheese or a comforting pizza. The Victorian definition of cozy often involved incredibly rich, often challenging, and invariably hearty broths and potted dishes made from a wider spectrum of creatures than you might expect. These were meals meant to restore, to fortify, to bring warmth and sustenance after a long, grueling day or a bout of seasonal chill. You'd imagine they'd wrap their hands around a thick, earthenware bowl, filled to the brim with something very, very much alive until very recently. Take, for instance, some of their soups. Beyond the famous, or infamous, mock turtle soup, there were genuine eel soups, thickened with bread or roux, intensely flavored with herbs, and sometimes even featuring actual pieces of eel staring up from the depths of the bowl. For many coastal and riverine communities, eels were an abundant and affordable source of protein, but the thought of their slithering form becoming a simmering delight probably makes your 21st century stomach perform a tiny sympathetic flip. Or perhaps a clear pigeon consommé, made from carefully stewed and clarified pigeon, prized for its delicate yet robust flavor, perfect for invalid stomachs, or simply for an elegant start to a meal. These were not the factory farm chickens of today, but truly wild game, with their own particular flavor profiles, sometimes intensely gamey, always distinctive. Then there were the potted pests, which sounds perhaps more alarming than it was to the Victorians. We're not talking about household rodents intended for the dinner table. Most Victorians found rats as abhorrent as you or I do. Instead, pests might refer to smaller game like rabbits, hares, or even squirrels, which, if left unchecked, could cause agricultural damage. These were incredibly common protein sources for many, especially in rural areas. Potted rabbit, for example, was a standard provision. Prepared much like the potted meat we discussed previously, it involved cooking rabbit until falling apart, shredding the meat, seasoning it generously, pressing it into small jars or crocks, and then sealing it under a layer of melted butter or clarified lard. Imagine, then, breaking open such a jar on a cold winter's afternoon, the solid fat layer protecting a rich, savory spread of shredded game. A ready meal, a sort of Victorian Lunchables for the truly adventurous. This dedication to making use of every available resource, from field and stream, was remarkable. An authoritative historical fact illustrates this enduring practical approach. Until well into the 20th century, particularly for working-class families and rural communities in Britain, small wild game like rabbits, hares, and various small birds, like sparrows or thrushes, were not simply exotic choices, but regular, highly valued sources of affordable protein, commonly prepared into stews, pies, and potted dishes. It was a matter of ingenuity and necessity, far removed from modern culinary supermarkets, filled with neatly butchered cuts. This extended beyond just meats. Many comfort soups would feature unusual root vegetables or grains combined in ways that surprise us today. Snail soup was not unheard of in some parts of England, and frog soup, while less common, also made appearances in more adventurous cookbooks, often made palatable with rich stocks and cream. They didn't have the convenience of modern broth in a carton. Stock was made from scratch, from bones, carcasses, and trimmings, sometimes simmering for days on the back of the range, an ever-present, fragrant hum in the kitchen. One can only imagine the sheer fortitude of their sense of smell. They probably would have scoffed at our notion of ready meals, muttering about the lack of true flavor and asking why on earth we're not using all the bits. This period was a real golden age of repurposing, or, as one might less elegantly put it, making do with whatever scampered or hopped across the landscape. The culinary challenge was to take these unusual proteins and transform them into something genuinely appetizing and comforting. Often, this meant long, slow cooking, generous seasoning with newly available spices, and serving with thick, homemade bread to sop up every drop of nourishing liquid. Think of it less as a novelty dish and more as a genuine necessity given the availability and price of larger cuts of meat. Your average Joe wasn't popping down to the meat emporium for a kilo of sirloin. An odd, off-topic fact related to this general efficiency. Concurrently, in other facets of Victorian life, the notion of waste not, want not also led to the infamous rag pickers and scavengers who sifted through urban waste, meticulously collecting anything salvageable. Bones for glue, rags for paper, metals for recycling. It wasn't just culinary economy. It was an entire societal philosophy of maximum utility. So your kitchen scraps might become fertilizer, your discarded fabric, paper, and your bones, glue for the latest piece of furniture. It was a holistic ecosystem of usage. Historians still debate whether these dishes, now largely consigned to the historical record, represent a forgotten period of sophisticated and truly diverse culinary practices, or if they were largely a byproduct of economic constraint and a different aesthetic palette that prioritized bulk and fortitude over subtle flavor or visual appeal. Did they enjoy these more unusual ingredients or simply endure them? Was it genuine comfort or just sustenance under the guise of it? There's a curious melancholy in contemplating what we've lost from their varied table, even as we collectively breathe a sigh of relief that our typical Sunday roasts are rabbit-free. So as you drift deeper, feel the phantom warmth from a distant, unseen hearth. Picture a worn wooden spoon stirring a pot of something deeply rich, a concoction that promised to mend all chills and sorrows, a comforting soup born from resourcefulness and a determination to leave no edible stone unturned. The gentle, almost soothing sounds of that era's practical kitchens, the soft bubbling of a long simmering broth, now serves to lull you into an even deeper, untroubled slumber, safe from any unexpected or unsettling ingredients in your dreams. Rest well, knowing your modern comfort foods are much more straightforward. From the hearty, often unconventional broths of the Victorian kitchen, let's now transition to something that should, theoretically, offer a lighter, sweeter counterpoint: dessert. But in the land of gas lamps and culinary conundrums, even the sweets came with their fair share of surprises, oddities, and often, frankly, baffling choices. So, as the last memory of potted rabbit settles comfortably into your sleepy subconscious, imagine the tinkling of spoons on porcelain, the gleam of crystal sugar bowls, and the slightly disconcerting sight of a dessert that might have made a contemporary child politely or not so politely, inquire, "Is this really pudding, Aunt Agatha?" The Victorians, with their ever-expanding empire and the increasing accessibility of sugar, thanks to improvements in cultivation and refining, and unfortunately, a historical dependence on slave labor for its early boom, had a colossal sweet tooth. They consumed sugar in quantities that would make a modern dentist faint on the spot, using it not just as a sweetener, but as a core ingredient in almost every conceivable confection. This wasn't just a spoonful in your tea. It was a commitment, a deep and abiding love affair. And this passion for sugar, combined with their knack for theatrical presentation and strange ingredients, yielded some truly memorable, if often odd, sweet treats. One recurring theme was the repurposing of vegetables into desserts, a bit like those identity-confused savory vegetables we talked about, but now in sweet disguise. Think of carrot pudding, more cake-like, but still carrot, or even parsnip cream, a sweetened, pured parsnip concoction that sounds like a dare from a particularly sadistic school dinner lady. Imagine spooning into something that looked like creamy custard, but tasted distinctly earthy. There were also more explicit vegetable puddings designed to conceal the less liked ingredients from finicky eaters. And perhaps, for the truly audacious, cucumber fritters, which sound as appealing as a sock full of doorknobs for dessert. Perhaps they felt it balanced the sweetness, or perhaps they just ran out of apples. Then there was the gelatin, our old quivering friend, making a triumphant return in the dessert course. Jellies? Yes, but often elaborately flavored and presented, with fruit suspended like amber specimens in formaldehyde, or colored into vivid artificial hues. Remember our talk about dodgy dyes from Section 7? Often, those lead and arsenic-based pigments were particularly beloved in sweets. But beyond simple fruit jellies, there were calf's foot jellies, often spiced with cinnamon or sherry, meant as a light, digestible treat. And for the grander affairs, architectural masterpieces known as trianons, towering multi-layered constructions of sponge cake, jelly, cream, and fruits, sometimes designed to replicate famous buildings or natural landscapes like miniature edible Versailles. If your wobbly sculpture could be both beautiful and edible, well, you truly arrived, didn't you? An authoritative historical fact that underscores their sweet inclinations. Despite early reliance on honey and natural sweeteners, by the end of the Victorian era, the average British person consumed far more sugar than their continental European counterparts. This was largely due to industrial sugar production and massive imports from the West Indies and other colonial sources, making sugar a cheaper, more ubiquitous ingredient than ever before, infiltrating every aspect of their diet, from breakfast to elaborate multi-course desserts. So, that persistent sweet craving was deeply ingrained and enabled by significant economic changes. Another popular category was the array of flummery and creams. These were soft, often airy concoctions made from thickened milk or cream, sometimes with ground nuts, sago, or corn flour, and often flavored with extracts like almond, rosewater, or vanilla. Sounds perfectly innocent, right? Well, sometimes they involved ingredients like snow eggs or elaborate whisking techniques that made them feel light and ethereal, almost like eating a perfumed cloud. But the use of artificial essences was quite common too, leading to desserts with surprisingly potent, often chemically derived flavors that bore little resemblance to natural fruit. Your simple almond essence might just have a very faint, peculiar tang. An odd, off-topic fact related to Victorian leisure and indulgence. Parallel to the rise of elaborate desserts was the invention and growing popularity of parlor games. Victorians loved to entertain not just with lavish meals, but with evenings filled with charades, tableaux vivants, and complex card games, often involving hidden clues or tricky objectives. Perhaps they needed something mentally engaging to distract them from what they'd just eaten for dessert, or just to work off some of that enormous sugar rush. Nothing sharpens the mind quite like the risk of accidental poisoning. Some of these sweets involved a fair degree of whimsy, even bordering on surreal. For example, poor man's goose, a pastry often made from spiced apple and currants, was sometimes flavored and shaped to mimic a roasted bird. Another twist on the dessert category, sometimes made from turnips or bread, mimicking meats. They just couldn't help themselves, could they? Their vegetables always wanted to be meat, and their desserts sometimes followed suit. It almost sounds like a culinary identity crisis in every course. Historians still debate whether the widespread adoption of these often intensely sweet, richly textured, and sometimes surprisingly non-fruity desserts, even those claiming to be fruit-based, were often loaded with sugar to preserve the fruit or sweeten bland varieties, stemmed from a lack of truly ripe fruit, an emphasis on energy-dense foods, or simply the fashion of the day as new ingredients became accessible. Were these a truly delicious end to a meal, or another instance of culinary spectacle where appearance trumped genuine delight? One can only imagine the sheer fortitude of Victorian taste buds, accustomed to sweetness levels that would make our modern palates shudder. As the soothing silence of the night surrounds you, let your imagination softly wander through a Victorian dessert spread. Picture towering jellies shimmering under a dim light, curious spiced puddings emanating rich aromas, and perhaps a rogue parsnip pretending to be something it's not, even in its candied form. The soft clinking of cutlery, the hushed appreciation of guests, and the pervasive, almost hypnotic scent of sugar permeate the air. It's a delightful, if at times perplexing, culinary landscape, leading you further into deep, undisturbed slumber. Dream sweetly, and perhaps with a reassuring lack of disguised vegetables in your final course. As the sweetness of those surprisingly strange Victorian desserts gently melts into the twilight of your thoughts, a new kind of liquid solace emerges in our quiet, gas-lit home. Here, the clinking of delicate glasses and the whisper of spoon on ceramic wasn't always about refreshment or polite celebration. Sometimes it was about healing, about invigoration, or most intriguing of all, about profound sedation. Welcome to the world of Victorian beverages and tonics designed to bring solace, whether to an anxious mind, a restless child, or simply someone seeking a deeper sleep. And yes, sometimes those soothing elements were far more potent than any sleepy tea. Imagine a restless evening, perhaps a touch of nerves, a general feeling of unease that the Victorian physician might term hysteria for ladies, or nervous exhaustion for gentlemen. What to reach for? Certainly not a simple glass of water. Instead, the popular choice might be a patent medicine, promising all manner of relief. These were liquid elixirs sold widely without any regulatory oversight, and their claims were as vast as their chemical compositions were varied. Some boasted about their fortifying properties, their digestive aid, or their nerve-soothing qualities. Many of these, surprisingly, were loaded with either potent doses of alcohol, morphine, opium, or cocaine. Yes, you heard that correctly. A quiet drink before bed might involve something strong enough to make you forget the entire week, let alone a restless night. No wonder everyone seemed to look perpetually calm and perhaps a little spaced out. Take the infamous Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. Advertised from the 1840s onwards, this was specifically marketed for teething children, promising to quiet fussiness and induce sleep. The primary active ingredients? Morphine and alcohol. So, if you recall your childhood, the times you were perhaps given something similar that worked very effectively, now you might be getting a glimpse into the pharmacological magic. Imagine the gentle clink of the bottle as the mother pours out a small, quiet dose. It solved the problem of the fussy baby, all right, by rendering it peacefully unconscious. What a concept! Modern parenting might have a few tricks, but none quite as direct as that. Beyond the patent medicines, domestic concoctions abounded. Remember the possets we touched on lightly in the past? These were traditional warm drinks, often made from milk curdled with ale or wine, sometimes thickened with breadcrumbs and spiced with nutmeg or cinnamon. More of a comforting, thick beverage designed to settle the stomach and induce sleep on a cold night. They were often quite delicious, if a bit chunky. A Victorian might not have called it an alcoholic beverage, but merely a pleasant, nourishing drink for evening, or one prescribed to build up a weak constitution. Another callback. Oh, don't worry, dear. It's just a light posset to help you rest. Never mind that it's half gin and stout. You see, an authoritative historical fact regarding these pervasive remedies. By the mid-19th century, opium, often in the form of laudanum, a tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, was freely available in apothecaries, grocers, and even general stores without prescription, and was commonly added to tonics and widely consumed by all social classes to relieve pain, promote sleep, and manage various ailments from colds to chronic diseases. Its widespread use, particularly among women, was partly due to its effectiveness in masking symptoms, but also contributed to a significant, unacknowledged level of addiction. The Victorian equivalent of popping a pill might have been downing a spoon of liquid oblivion. There were also specific, elaborate drinks designed purely for therapeutic purpose, sometimes resembling culinary science experiments more than pleasurable refreshments. For instance, the enduring beef tea we discussed earlier was not just a medical food. It was frequently a recommended drink, consumed warm, perhaps with a touch of pepper. Imagine cradling a warm mug, not of cocoa, but of clear, intense beef essence, guaranteed to restore the vital force. Or, for general digestive well-being, barley water, sometimes flavored with lemon, used as a soothing, gentle alternative for unsettled stomachs. The world before Pepto-Bismol was truly inventive, if often bovine. An odd, off-topic fact related to Victorian health. While they were quaffing opium-laced tonics, the popularity of public health crusades was simultaneously on the rise. They were battling cholera through sanitary reform, yet freely dispensing incredibly addictive and potent drugs. It was a bizarre, often contradictory approach to well-being, as if they solved one problem only to create another. Perhaps they just liked a bit of a challenge. Right. We've filtered the water. Now let's just add a dash of chloroform to our bedtime cocoa. The variety of ingredients found in these tonic drinks was astonishing. From gentian root bitters, still around today in some forms, rhubarb, various barks, to exotic spices meant to stimulate circulation or purify the blood. Often, these ingredients were merely fillers to mask the overwhelming taste of alcohol or opiates. Imagine trying to make sense of the label. For ailments of the spleen, 18% alcohol with extracts of willow bark, mandrake, and a soupçon of dragon's breath. It's hard to make that sound genuinely appetizing. Yet, they consume them in vast quantities. Historians still debate whether the widespread reliance on alcohol and opium-laced tonics truly reflected a severe and endemic public health crisis requiring such strong palliation, or if it was also a societal byproduct of social constraints, Victorian stoicism, and limited entertainment options leading to a pervasive quiet desperation. Finding solace in commercially available mood-altering substances. Did they need that dose of laudanum, or did it just provide a convenient, chemically induced escape from the pressures of polite society? You have to wonder how many politely stifled yawns were actually the result of their heavily fortified afternoon cure. As your conscious mind drifts away into the deepest, softest recesses of night, let the ghostly aroma of a peculiar Victorian elixir fill your imagined bedroom. Picture the quiet light reflecting off a dark bottle, the slow, thick pour of a syrupy tonic into a small glass, promising not just sleep, but perhaps a brief hazy reprieve from the demands of a complex world. The faint whisper of Victorian remedies, potent and puzzling, now serve as the ultimate lullaby, pulling you gently down into pure, unadulterated sleep. Rest well, my friend, and be thankful your sleep aid contains nothing more than a peaceful absence of thought. As the hazy, perhaps slightly narcotic, glow of those Victorian tonics gently lifts from your mind, replaced by the profound tranquility of a nearing deep sleep, our journey now steers into the glittering, often bewildering heart of Victorian social life, the formal dinner party. This wasn't merely a meal. It was an elaborate ritual, a carefully orchestrated performance where culinary extravagance mingled with strict social etiquette, and where the demands of decorum sometimes produce dishes that defy modern culinary logic. So, tuck yourself in tighter and imagine the stiff formality of starched linen, the murmur of polite conversation, and the often startling array of edibles arrayed for show. These weren't casual potlucks, you understand. A Victorian dinner party was a highly choreographed event, designed to display wealth, taste, and social standing. Everything from the intricate table settings, multiple forks and knives for different courses, specific glasses for different wines, to the precise order of serving spoke volumes about the host's status. The sheer volume of food presented was often overwhelming. Think less, dinner for 8, and more enough food to feed a small regiment for a week, all displayed simultaneously in the fashion known as service à la Russe, where dishes were carved and served from side tables rather than presented directly on the dining table, as in the older service à la Française. This shift towards individual serving, ironically, pushed hosts to present even more dishes to make the side tables look impressively bountiful, even if guests could only manage a fraction. This emphasis on display had a profound impact on the recipes themselves. Dishes needed to be visually stunning, sometimes even theatrical, to justify their presence. Our familiar friend, the aspic, made a glorious return, not just for its wobbling novelty, but for its ability to encase food beautifully and hold complex shapes for display. Roasted meats might be decorated with intricate garnishes or elaborate trimmings. Vegetables might be sculpted or dyed to add visual flair. The goal wasn't always peak flavor, but rather peak impression. Can you imagine preparing a centerpiece dish that required 48 hours of constant attention, only for your guests to politely nibble at a single piece and declare, "Quite delightful, dear, quite delightful"? The hidden culinary anguish of the host must have been palpable. The menu was a multi-course epic stretching across hours. Typically, you'd begin with a clear soup, then fish, then perhaps a larger remove, a joint of meat, sometimes a grandly decorated roast, followed by entrees, smaller, richer dishes like cutlets or rissoles, a game course, then various puddings, jellies, and desserts, ending with cheese and fruit. And that's a simplified version. The sheer stamina required to consume such a quantity of food, or at least to appear to consume it, is impressive. No wonder tonics with relaxing ingredients were so popular. One needed a pick-me-up to tackle course 6, and then a lie-down to recover from the ordeal. More quail stuffed with truffles, Aunt Agnes? Goodness me, I couldn't. The plate might be tiny, but the expectations were grand. This elaborate progression meant dishes often had to be conceived to be prepared in advance and served either cold or at room temperature, as continuous reheating was impractical for so many items. This practicality also contributed to the popularity of aspics, galantines, cold, deboned meats often molded into shapes, and elaborate salads which could sit for hours on the sideboard without spoiling. An authoritative historical fact underscoring this opulence and its eventual critique. As the 19th century progressed and industrialization made even greater abundance possible, the lavishness of Victorian dinner parties, especially in wealthy households, became increasingly excessive. This led to calls for more modest, digestible meals by health reformers and satirists towards the century's end, with some deploring the waste of food and the detrimental impact on diners' health, describing them as gastronomic ordeals rather than enjoyable repasts. It seems some, even at the time, thought these feasts were a tad much. Waste, sadly, was an almost inevitable byproduct of such displays. Leftovers from a grand dinner could be enormous, often simply discarded or fed to staff, rather than being neatly parceled up for tomorrow's lunch. The sheer volume prepared was part of the show, indicating abundance. It was less about cleaning your plate and more about seeing your plate barely touched after offering an ungodly amount of choices. It almost makes you want to pack a doggy bag under the table. An odd, off-topic fact revealing Victorian anxieties. The social anxiety surrounding these meals was so intense that guidebooks offered explicit instructions on how to use cutlery, when to speak, and how to avoid gaffes like cutting food into ugly little lumps, reflecting a profound desire to perform social grace perfectly, lest one reveal their lower-class origins. Perhaps those who cut food into ugly little lumps simply struggled under the weight of such an oppressive culinary system. The sheer labor involved was equally prodigious. For a major dinner party, a small army of cooks, scullery maids, footmen, and butlers would be mobilized, all working tirelessly to produce, serve, and clear the vast quantities of food. The kitchen staff probably looked more like an army staging a military operation than a culinary team. Their brows furrowed with the immense strategic task of coordinating dozens of dishes across several hours, and all for an evening of polite conversation about the weather. No Netflix for them, just exhaustion. Historians still debate whether these elaborate dinner parties truly enhanced social connection and fostered meaningful relationships, or if they were primarily stressful, competitive performances of wealth and social status, where the real culinary enjoyment was secondary to the display. Did Aunt Millicent genuinely appreciate that boned capon in aspic, or was she just desperately hoping for the cheese course so she could leave? It makes one wonder how many friendships were genuinely forged over a mock venison pie, and how many were shattered by a spilled trifle. So, as you sink deeper, allowing the images of intricate molds and overflowing platters to gently disperse, think of the immense theatricality and dedication that went into these grand Victorian dinners, the quiet clinking of glasses, the murmured compliments, the rustle of gowns, and beneath it all, the tremendous effort and occasionally baffling culinary creations, designed less for nourishment and more for the spectacle of it all. It's a captivating thought, leading you towards a deep, dreamless sleep, where no one will ever pressure you to consume another single, highly adorned dish. Sleep soundly, far from any fussy forks. As the spectral clinking of cutlery from the grand Victorian dinner party fades into a distant memory, replaced by the profound quiet of your deepening slumber, let us focus on a particularly prevalent, yet now remarkably foreign category on the Victorian menu: foul play, specifically the startling array of avian creatures that often grace their plates beyond your familiar chicken. While we largely confine ourselves to plump chickens, dignified turkeys, or the occasional duck today, the Victorians possessed a much broader and, frankly, more adventurous approach to anything that flew, fluttered, or simply pecked about in the fields. Settle deeper and imagine the quiet rustle of feathers, not just from plump game birds, but from surprisingly diminutive creatures whose fleeting presence might make a modern diner blink in utter confusion. Imagine a Sunday roast, not of chicken, but perhaps a pigeon. For many, especially in rural areas, pigeons were a readily available and economically viable source of protein. They kept dovecotes, and young squabs, baby pigeons, were considered a delicacy, tender and flavorsome. Pigeon pies, robustly spiced and often cooked in a crust, were common fare. They weren't just city nuisances, they were dinner. And it's not the same as saying, "Would you like a bit of rat on your plate?" But for many, it now occupies a similar psychological space. But the Victorians didn't stop at pigeons. Their definition of game extended to a fascinating roster of smaller, less common birds. Larks, thrushes, plovers, fieldfares, blackbirds, even sparrows were frequently caught in nets or snares, especially during leaner seasons. These diminutive birds, sometimes weighing no more than a few ounces, were roasted whole or, even more painstakingly, deboned and incorporated into small pies or pâtés. Picture, if you will, a meticulously prepared pie that required the plucking, dressing, and cooking of dozens of tiny birds to fill. One might imagine the cook looking slightly unhinged by the time they got to the 30th tiny carcass. Right. That's just a few more wing bones to pull out of little Reginald. I suppose it adds character. For grander occasions, the sheer ambition extended to significantly larger fowl. Swans, though largely symbolic now and often protected, were historically consumed and made occasional appearances at banquets. And while the peacock was perhaps more of a majestic, often stuffed and refeathered centerpiece meant purely for display, its meat being rather tough and dry. Its occasional culinary contemplation shows the extent of Victorian curiosity. It speaks to a culinary philosophy that viewed the entire feathered kingdom as a potential ingredient, provided you could catch it, and then somehow make it tender. An authoritative historical fact regarding this broad diet. Due to both the availability of wild game and economic necessity for many segments of society, and even for culinary prestige in wealthier households, game birds far beyond what we typically eat today were a routine part of the British diet throughout the Victorian era. Game dealers in London markets would regularly offer a variety of wild birds, ranging from grouse, pheasants, and partridges to the smaller larks, snipe, and plovers, showcasing a remarkable diversity of avian options that has largely disappeared from modern plates. So, if you were picky about your fowl, you probably weren't getting a full plate back then. The methods of preparation reflected the characteristics of these birds. Lean, often tough game birds required slow braising, stewing, or incorporation into rich, savory pies designed to add moisture and flavor. Robust seasoning, sometimes with strong herbs like sage or juniper, and hearty sauces were crucial to complement the intense, earthy taste of wild fowl. For tiny birds, the process was often a delicate roasting to achieve crisp skin, perhaps consume bones and all. Imagine taking a mouthful and navigating through what feels like a handful of exquisitely fragile splinters, all in the name of a meal. Oh, delightful! The bones just add to the rustic charm, wouldn't you say, Mildred? This wasn't just about survival either. There was a genuine appreciation for the unique flavors and textures that these various birds offered. A woodcock or snipe, often roasted whole with their internal organs, trail left inside, were prized for their rich, gamey intensity. It seems the less common the bird, the more sporting it was, and therefore, perhaps, the more delectable. For someone used to very lean meats, the unctuous richness of some game birds would have been a prized luxury. An odd, off-topic fact revealing the Victorians' fascination with the natural world. Concurrently, with their varied diet of birds, bird watching became a popular amateur pursuit, often carried out by gentlemen armed with binoculars, attempting to identify and catalog new species. There was a dual relationship here. Observe and appreciate nature, but also cook and consume nature. The contrast between the sheer diversity of Victorian poultry dishes and our modern limited options is quite striking. Today, the thought of eating a roasted blackbird feels almost sacrilegious, something out of a nursery rhyme rather than a dinner plan. Yet for Victorians, it was simply part of the seasonal culinary cycle, another opportunity for flavor and sustenance. And indeed, many historical cookbooks even feature recipes for specific species, showing a remarkable precision in their understanding of these creatures' individual culinary properties. Historians still debate whether the widespread consumption of these very diverse birds indicates a significantly different palate among Victorians, who may have been less sensitive to gamey flavors and strong textures, or if it was predominantly a reflection of economic necessity and the practical use of all available natural resources. Was there a genuine gourmet appreciation for the faint earthy essence of a roasted thrush? Or was it simply what was available and made palatable through skillful, or indeed over-the-top, cooking? We might wonder if they secretly dreamed of plump, unassuming chickens like ours. As the last rustle of feathers from forgotten fowl settles, and your consciousness drifts deeper into serene slumber, let us pull back from the exotic and grand, and instead focus on something far more intimate and fundamentally Victorian: the sheer, unwavering dedication to waste not, want not. This wasn't merely a quaint saying. It was a driving philosophy that permeated every aspect of their lives, and certainly their kitchens. Prepare to be amazed and perhaps a little unsettled by the ingenious and sometimes rather stomach-churning ways the Victorians recycled every last crumb, every last bone, every last everything. Curl up, my friend, and imagine the quiet, resolute spirit of extreme frugality turning yesterday's leavings into tomorrow's unlikely feast. In a world before easily accessible rubbish collections and the notion of disposable anything, resources were precious. The idea of throwing away perfectly edible food was not just wasteful, it was almost morally reprehensible. So, if something remained from dinner, even seemingly unpromising scraps, the Victorian cook was already mentally cataloging its next incarnation. Think of it less as leftovers and more as ingredients for a culinary alchemy, transforming the humble into something entirely new, or at least entirely consumed. This might involve reheating, reconstituting, blending, pressing, or adding new, powerful flavors to mask any challenges. Take bread, for instance. Stale bread wasn't tossed. It was treasured, dried and grated into breadcrumbs for thickening puddings or coating cutlets. Remember those peculiar entrees from our dinner party discussions? Soaked in milk and butter to become bread pudding, a dense, comforting dessert, or boiled and mixed with vegetables and fat to create savory dumplings or a sort of basic gruel. Imagine a cupboard not just for fresh bread, but for several bags of rock-hard aged loaves, patiently waiting for their glorious rebirth. No wasteful sourdough discards here, folks, and meat scraps, oh, the possibilities. Bones, picked clean or nearly clean in their determination, weren't simply binned. They were boiled down, repeatedly, for stocks and broths, sometimes for days, extracting every last iota of flavor and gelatin. Leftover roast bits, whether from beef, lamb, or indeed our previous friend the rabbit, wouldn't just be sliced cold. They'd be minced, spiced, and pressed into a savory pâté, or made into bubble and squeak with leftover mashed potato and cabbage, or enveloped in a simple pastry to become a scrap pie. One could genuinely call it a surprise pie, as the surprise might involve which leftover creature had the honor of being enclosed in its crust. Perhaps the pigeons had an afterlife. This relentless recycling extended to vegetables too. Leftover boiled greens, instead of languishing sadly, might be chopped and mashed with potatoes for bubble and squeak, a meal named, rather vividly, for the sounds it made as it cooked. Stems and tougher parts of vegetables might be simmered into stocks, then strained out. Even discarded fruit peels could be simmered with sugar to make jams or syrups. often giving an almost astringent, intensely sweet flavor. It was a philosophy that preached not just economy, but respect for the bounty, no matter how humble its final form. A Victorian fridge might not have had an expiry date on it, but rather a warning sign to prepare for glorious rebirth. An authoritative historical fact showcasing this extreme repurposing. Many Victorian working class and rural recipes, collected and documented by food historians, show a clear reliance on second-day dishes where little used scraps of food, meat offcuts, bones, and stale bread were ingeniously transformed into nourishing, flavorful meals. Examples include resurrection pies, hasty puddings, and a plethora of uses for drippings. The rendered fat from roasted meats, ensuring that very little, if any, calorific value was ever truly wasted in a typical household budget. This practice often stemmed from necessity, but also from deeply ingrained habits of frugality that spanned generations. Fat, especially rendered animal fat, dripping, was a cornerstone of this no-waste approach. Collected meticulously from roasts and fried foods, it was used for cooking, spreading on bread as a cheap substitute for butter, or in baking. No amount of dripping was too small to collect. Your granny might tell you a similar tale, but their buckets of dripping were truly impressive. They even had specific containers for collecting the dripping. It was an everyday liquid gold. And what about fish? The scraps from cleaning, the heads, the bones, all destined for fish stock, or sometimes roasted for direct consumption. Even the seemingly unappealing jelly that formed around leftover cooked fish in its own juices was appreciated and consumed. If you made fish, you were making stock, whether you wanted to or not. It's a reminder of a time when the entire creature, from scales to fins, had its inherent purpose, even in its decomposition or repurposing. One could say they looked at a fish and saw a culinary puzzle waiting to be solved. An odd, off-topic fact related to this systematic use of every scrap. During the Victorian era, the meticulous classification and organization of objects were paramount, from the British Museum's burgeoning collections to detailed botanical classifications and vast personal libraries. This same meticulousness extended to their domestic waste management. Almost nothing was simply trash, but rather categorized for its potential to be repurposed, highlighting a pervasive cultural impulse towards order and utility. It's as if even their garbage had its own rigid hierarchical system. The motivation for this radical recycling was manifold. Economic necessity, as we've noted, but also a societal mindset that highly valued frugality and resourcefulness. For a Victorian woman running a household, her ability to make a delicious and nutritious meal out of very little was a profound source of pride and competency. Historians still debate the specific blend of pragmatism, social pressure, and cultural appreciation for ingenuity that drove such extensive culinary recycling. Was it pure economic logic, or a sophisticated art form developed over centuries to impress others with how much could be done with how little? We, with our pre-cut veg and pristine meats, rarely have the opportunity to engage in such depths of culinary improvisation. So, as the silent echoes of the Victorian kitchen surround you, and you sink into a state of profound peace, envision the meticulous collecting of every last drop of rendered fat, every final crumb of bread, every stray bone. It's a quiet testament to a past where food was sacred, where hunger was a very real specter, and where human ingenuity stretched the boundaries of sustenance beyond anything we commonly practice today. It's a gentle, reassuring hum of a time when nothing was ever truly lost, merely transformed. Let that thought soothe you into the deepest, most undisturbed sleep. And remember, your discarded vegetable peels from tomorrow might still be a culinary delight for someone else, if only in your very whimsical dreams. As the ghost of radical recycling gently recedes into the silent, well-managed corners of the Victorian pantry, your consciousness softly glides into the final quiet chapter of our journey. Having explored everything from gelatinous creations to exotic meats, and from questionable medical tonics to repurposed scraps, you might find yourself wondering, where did all these peculiar culinary practices go? Why aren't you served mock turtle soup on your flight or presented with potted squirrel at a fancy restaurant? The truth, my friend, is that the wisdom encoded in those forgotten Victorian cookbooks slowly, inexorably began to wane, supplanted by new technologies, new social norms, and a changing understanding of what food truly should be. Imagine, if you will, the slow, quiet dawn of a new century, after Queen Victoria herself passed on, signaling the twilight of an era. The innovations that were simmering in the background of Victorian life, like the emerging science of refrigeration, began to boil over, radically transforming kitchens. No longer did you solely depend on salting, pickling, or risky potting methods to keep your provisions edible for extended periods. The introduction of the icebox, and later the mechanical refrigerator, was nothing short of a culinary revolution. This meant less need for heavily salted meats or elaborate jellies to preserve, freeing cooks from hours of preparation and offering fresh ingredients for much longer. Suddenly, the entire elaborate infrastructure of waste not, want not, of dangerous preserves simply began to feel, well, a little old-fashioned. Oh, don't worry, dear. The lamb will keep in the electric chill box. No need for several days of salting and parboiling today. A cook's quiet sigh of relief probably echoed throughout many kitchens. Beyond the cool hum of the refrigerator, new understandings of public health, fueled by germ theory, remember that very influential Mr. Pasteur, fundamentally altered perceptions of food safety. No longer were those odd tastes or upsets simply bad luck. They were now understood to be the result of invisible microbes. This meant more stringent hygiene, safer canning practices, and a general aversion to foods that were intrinsically riskier or had a propensity for spoiling. Those brightly colored sweets with their dubious dyes, or those suspicious bread whiteners we spoke about. Slowly but surely, thanks to dedicated campaigners and legislative efforts, like those food acts we briefly touched upon, they faced greater scrutiny and began to fade from respectable use. Your tea, at last, could truly be just tea, without any added sheep dung. Culturally, tastes shifted dramatically, especially after the immense disruption of World War I. There was a palpable weariness of Victorian excess, formality, and elaborate showmanship. Simpler meals, a more streamlined approach to entertaining, and a general move towards what was perceived as more wholesome or modern fare began to gain traction. The multi-course gastronomic endurance tests began to fall out of favor, replaced by slightly less overwhelming meals. Nobody had the time, or frankly, the energy to orchestrate a 15-course banquet with 5 different kinds of gelatin, especially when so many social norms were crumbling in the face of seismic global events. Plus, with the increasing loss of domestic staff, the literal armies of scullery maids and cooks that fueled the old dinner parties, such culinary ambition became increasingly impractical for even wealthy households, an authoritative historical fact solidifying this change. The widespread adoption of mechanical refrigeration, burgeoning knowledge of germ theory and food preservation, and the societal shifts accelerated by the 2 world wars drastically diminished the need for and popularity of many labor-intensive and highly processed Victorian preservation techniques, such as heavy salting, traditional potting, and elaborate aspects for storage rather than mere display, thereby revolutionizing the everyday diet. Moreover, the availability of ingredients changed. Industrialized farming, which favored specific breeds for their prime cuts, meant less diverse offal in everyday butchers. Exotic animals, which were often acquired through colonial means, became less common and eventually faced stronger ethical opposition or protective legislation. You couldn't just ship live turtles across the Atlantic anymore for a party. Your average dinner guest probably preferred to not have to guess if their appetizer had recently shared a habitat with a badger. This natural narrowing of available ingredients led to a gradual collective amnesia regarding many of the odd meats and preparation methods we discussed. Historians still debate the extent to which these cultural and technological shifts fundamentally altered what society desired to eat, or simply made former culinary necessities seem unnecessarily complicated and distasteful once alternatives emerged. Did we genuinely lose our taste for pickled pigeons, or did we just no longer need them? Of course, not everything from the Victorian pantry vanished entirely. Echoes linger. The British love affair with marmalade, often an acquired taste for non-Brits. Their fondness for heavy puddings, though often simplified now, and some forms of pâté still remain popular. Black pudding, a traditional blood sausage, while not for everyone, endures in parts of Britain. The spirit of making do, of not wasting, continued well into the 20th century, particularly during periods of austerity like the World Wars, influencing recipes like Woolton pie, a hearty wartime vegetable pie, a very modern take on an old necessity. We still owe a debt to Victorian ingenuity in that sense. Their ability to stretch ingredients continues to be useful in times of economic hardship. Perhaps, though, the greatest legacy of these forgotten cookbooks lies not in what we still eat, but in what they teach us about human adaptability and creativity. They are a testament to societies striving to feed themselves, to innovate within their technological and cultural constraints, and to find comfort and expression through food. These recipes show us how wildly subjective and historically mutable our definition of delicious and normal truly is. One generation's medicinal meat is another's forgotten culinary oddity, and a third's quiet horror. It makes you wonder what our descendants will think of our oddly precise kale smoothie bowls or avocado toast a century from now. They actually chose to eat something so green, they might whisper, utterly mystified. So, as your journey through this curious, sometimes perplexing Victorian culinary landscape comes to its gentle end, and you settle completely into your comfortable bed, let the lessons learned about adaptability and the fleeting nature of fashion linger softly. The smells of gas lamps, the whispers of polite dinner conversations, and the curious, often alarming array of Victorian recipes all gently fade. All that's left is the steady rhythm of your breath and the comforting stillness of your room. Tonight, you are a silent traveler through culinary history, finally at peace, far from any challenging jelly mold or surprising squirrel pie, as the echoes of our shared journey through the bizarre and fascinating kitchens of the Victorian era gently fade, dissolving into the quiet hum of the night. Allow yourself to float effortlessly deeper, embracing the stillness that settles over you. We've tiptoed through a time when culinary invention knew few bounds, from the elaborate jiggle of shimmering aspics that encased fish, fowl, or anything else that held still, to the surprisingly bold embrace of offal and the rather alarming practice of food adulteration that seasoned everyday meals with unintended, often toxic, ingredients. We've sampled curious medicinal broths designed to mend spirits and mend bodies, often with a generous side of opiates, and pondered the theatrical grandeur of dinner parties that pushed the limits of both digestion and social politeness, showcasing forgotten game birds and daring experiments in flavor. Each culinary eccentricity, each ingenious act of radical recycling, tells a profound story of resilience, innovation, and a society that simply didn't waste a thing. Consider now how time transforms not just ingredients, but entire approaches to nourishment, leaving behind traces for curious minds like yours to gently uncover. Those peculiar pots and questionable tonics, those endless preparations for foods long gone from our plates, are but echoes of an enduring human desire to nurture, to celebrate, and sometimes simply to survive within the constraints and curiosities of their own remarkable epoch. As the soft darkness embraces you fully, blurring the edges of what's known and unknown, rest with the gentle assurance that the fascinating flavors of history will always whisper secrets for a tired mind to softly explore. Drift away, knowing that even in their strangest moments, the past offers comforting stories to guide you into the deepest, most tranquil slumber